take this for granted. Democracy dies in silence.
And I think the Democrats were taken by surprise, but they shouldn't have been. They are elected professionals.
On April 19th, 2025, America witnessed something it had not seen in decades. Millions of people in cities, towns, and quiet suburbs took to the streets. They marched not for a single cause, but for a feeling that something in this country is deeply broken. They called it the Day of Action. The news called it a minor disruption, a flash in the pan, another weekend headline easily forgotten. But behind the slogans and the chants, something darker was stirring. A warning to the powerful, a signal to those watching from the shadows, and a reminder to all of us that the storm is just beginning. To understand why April 19th matters, we have to go back to the forces that built this day, brick by brick, anger by anger. The Day of Action did not appear out of nowhere. It was born from years of pressure, silent at first, but growing stronger with every broken promise, every widening crack in the American dream. It started in January 2025, when sweeping new tariffs were announced. Intended to bring back American jobs, the tariffs backfired almost immediately. Prices for everyday goods surged, small businesses began laying off workers, and industries already weakened by inflation, like farming, trucking, and retail, took the first hits. While official news outlets reassured the public that the economy was strong, a different story played out across kitchen tables and gas stations. A silent panic was brewing. At the same time, frustration with immigration policies reached a breaking point. Raids increased, families were separated, border towns became militarized zones overnight. National pride twisted into fear, and fear turned into anger. Anger aimed not just at politicians, but at a system seen as rigged and indifferent. Meanwhile, outbreaks of preventable diseases, like measles in Texas, exposed the fragility of America's public health system. Mistrust in institutions spread like wildfire, fed by years of misinformation and media distrust. It was not one speech or one event that triggered the Day of Action. It was 1,000 small betrayals. In March 2025, a viral video from a laid-off factory worker in Ohio lit the match. In tears, she described losing her job, her insurance, and her hope, all within a month. The video was shared millions of times, and with it came a single message: if we do not act now, we never will. From there, organizing exploded across social media platforms, encrypted apps, grassroots networks, underground forums. The Day of Action was no longer just an idea. It was a movement, fueled by desperation, unified by anger. But what were they really marching for? Not just lower prices, not just better policies, something much deeper and far more dangerous to the status quo. The Day of Action was not about one issue. It was about everything Americans were told they could have, and everything they realized was slipping away. Jobs that paid a living wage, homes that were affordable, healthcare that did not bankrupt families, schools that prepared the next generation for more than debt. It was about the lie of endless progress, colliding with the reality of daily survival. By 2025, half of working Americans could not cover a $500 emergency. Wages stagnated while inflation drove essentials: food, gas, rent, higher month after month. The so-called economic recovery of the early 2020s had left millions behind. The protesters were not just students or activists. They were middle-aged truck drivers, retired teachers, single mothers, veterans. For the first time in a generation, despair crossed party lines. Beyond the economy, something deeper was dying. Trust. Trust in government. Trust in media. Trust in each other. Every new scandal, every broken promise, every corporate bailout, every political lie chipped away at the fragile faith that the system would eventually work for the people. The Day of Action was not demanding tweaks to the system. It was demanding a reckoning. Perhaps the most terrifying thing for those in power was that the Day of Action had no true leader and no party affiliation. It was bigger than left versus right. It was about survival. The media tried, and failed, to label it as radical or fringe. But when millions move in unison, they are no longer fringe. They are the nation. But if the anger was so vast, and the movement so powerful, why did the media barely cover it? And why were Americans left in the dark about what was truly happening under their feet?
It was worth the drive to stand up for democracy and to let...
In the age of instant news, you would think that a movement like the Day of Action would be impossible to ignore. Yet, within hours of the protests erupting across the country, the media quickly tried to contain the fire. At first, it was labelled a fluke, a temporary spike in frustration, nothing more than the latest social media fad. But as the crowds grew and the anger deepened, the narrative shifted. Any movement that threatens the established order must be labelled fringe. So, that's exactly what the media did. The mainstream outlets were quick to paint protesters as extremists, as radicals. They focused on isolated incidents, a few broken windows, a scuffle with police, as proof that the entire movement was dangerous, violent, and un-American. But what the cameras missed, what they ignored entirely, were the peaceful marches, the families walking together, the quiet solidarity shared by people who were fed up with being ignored. The real story wasn't violence, it was fear. As the protest spread, the media responded with distractions. The latest celebrity gossip, the president's Twitter storm, new scandals, anything to take attention away from the deep unrest simmering across the nation. In the midst of it all, the people of America, struggling, rallying, and demanding change, were buried in a mountain of noise. But the media didn't just ignore the protests. They actively misled the public. Behind the scenes, corporations with heavy political interests worked hand in hand with media outlets to shape the narrative. Big Pharma, Big Oil, the military-industrial complex all had a stake in keeping the truth buried. And when protesters began speaking out against these very industries, the pressure grew. In meetings held behind closed doors, media executives and political leaders agreed, this can't get too big. It must be contained. As the days passed, fewer and fewer outlets dared to report on the true scale of the protests. Coverage was slashed, stories were buried, and in its place, the American public was fed a sanitized version of the truth. But for the first time in a long time, the narrative was slipping from their hands. The Day of Action, and what it really stood for, was not something they could control forever. While the world watched the Day of Action unfold, few realized that what they were witnessing was only the tip of the iceberg. What the media didn't show you was the network of organizers working in the shadows, a vast, decentralized movement that was quietly building for months. This wasn't an accident. The Day of Action was not just a spontaneous outpouring of anger. It was meticulously organized, not through traditional channels, but through encrypted apps and underground forums where mainstream media could not reach. For months, activists from all walks of life, teachers, nurses, students, truckers, even retirees, had been planning. They communicated through secretive channels, constantly adapting and evolving their methods to evade detection. No central leadership, no clear hierarchy, just a shared goal, to create a mass, undeniable movement. On the ground, it was the local communities that truly drove the movement. Local organizers worked together in tight-knit, trusted networks, pulling in volunteers, organizing carpools, securing permits. They knew their cities, their streets, their people. From the streets of Detroit to the outskirts of Albuquerque, leaders emerged who were not politicians or celebrities, but ordinary people who knew the struggle all too well. And it wasn't just about protesting. It was about the power of connection, showing that the fight for justice, for fairness, was everywhere. Social media played a key role in the organizing of the Day of Action. But it was more than just hashtags and viral tweets. Encrypted apps like Signal and Telegram became the lifeblood of the movement, allowing activists to plan without fear of surveillance. Technology gave them the ability to scale faster than the media could keep up. It enabled activists to bypass traditional barriers and move as a collective force. As the Day of Action came to an end, the media declared the protest over. But for those who organized, it was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, the networks continued to thrive. When the Day of Action took place, the world saw a glimpse of the collective anger of millions. But what many did not see were the consequences that followed. In the days that followed, authorities across the country began cracking down on protesters. Hundreds were arrested, charged with everything from unlawful assembly to rioting. In cities where the protests were most intense, curfews were declared and police forces were militarized. But it wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about sending a message that these protests would not go unpunished. In the wake of the Day of Action, surveillance technology reached new heights. The government quietly pushed for more power to monitor citizens, citing national security and public safety as justifications. Public outrage began to grow as it became clear that even those who simply attended a protest could be tracked and targeted. In response to this, activists launched countermeasures, using encryption tools and VPNs to mask their identities, though many knew the danger they faced. For those who were arrested, the consequences were harsh. Not just fines and jail time, but lifetime records that could haunt them in the future, blocking them from jobs, loans, and basic freedoms. Behind closed doors, powerful lawmakers saw the Day of Action as more than a threat. It was a wake-up call. In the months that followed, new legislation was quietly pushed through. Bills that expanded government surveillance powers and bills designed to crack down on civil disobedience. Though these bills were sold to the public as measures to protect citizens, critics saw them for what they truly were: tools to stifle dissent and maintain control. While the public was distracted by the latest media scandals, key pieces of legislation passed with minimal opposition. The government's response wasn't just about dealing with protesters, it was about reshaping the narrative. The divide between the government and the people grew even wider. On one side, you had the people, angry, desperate for change, demanding their voices be heard. On the other, you had the government, protecting its interests, keeping its power in place. The lines were drawn. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As the government tightened its grip, the real question emerged. What will happen to the future of this movement? Is this the beginning of something bigger? Or is it just another footnote in the struggle for change? The Day of Action was not the end. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. It was the spark that lit the fuse, and the fuse is far from burning out. The government may have cracked down on the protesters, but they could not extinguish the flame of resistance. This movement, this collective desire for change, was already evolving. Across the country, new leaders are emerging, new strategies are taking form, and the people who have been ignored for so long are starting to demand their place at the table. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of the Day of Action isn't in the laws that were passed or the protests that filled the streets. It's in the shift in consciousness that occurred on April 19th. For the first time in decades, a large swath of the American public realized that their individual struggles, whether it be debt, housing, healthcare, or corruption, were part of a bigger picture. They began to understand that their voices, collectively, could change the world. It was the first step in the fight for a new future. The government may have temporarily succeeded in pushing the protests underground, but it cannot stop the political tide that is coming. With every passing day, more candidates from local races to the highest levels of government are running on platforms inspired by the very issues raised by the Day of Action. Politicians are starting to realize that change is not just demanded from the top down, it's demanded from the bottom up. And with every vote cast for a new progressive candidate, every new law that challenges the status quo, the movement lives on. The tools of the movement are changing as well. The rise of digital activism, encrypted messaging, decentralized social media platforms, and online fundraising means that no government crackdown can silence this fight for long. In fact, every attempt to suppress the movement only makes it stronger. Because with each attempt to shut it down, the flame spreads wider, across new platforms, into new corners of society. The Day of Action wasn't a mere moment in time. It was a reflection of the anger and despair that have been quietly growing for decades. It was a reaction to a world that no longer feels just, no longer feels fair. But it also showed us something else, that when the people rise, the system will be forced to listen. So, as we look to the future, one thing is clear. The struggle is far from over. And though the media may try to bury the truth, though the government may attempt to repress the voices of the people, there will always be those willing to rise again. This is the beginning of a new era, one where the voices of the people can no longer be ignored. The future is uncertain, but one thing is for sure. The fight for a better, more just world is far from over. The Day of Action was only the first chapter, and the rest of the story is still being written.